Craig and Karen supporting local bookstores, audiobooks, and more. Join the world of stories. As always, thank you for listening.
Welcome to the Libro.fm podcast, where we talk to authors, narrators, booksellers, and more. I'm Karen.
And I'm Craig. On today's episode, we had the pleasure of interviewing renowned horror author Stephen Graham Jones.
We sure did. This was a big deal for us because, as you may have picked up on, we are big horror fans. We read a lot of that type of content. And so we were so excited to finally get to meet him and talk about his brand new book, which I think at the time of us recording this conversation has just come out.
I think it comes out tomorrow.
Oh, it's tomorrow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Perfect timing.
Also, the time of recording is July 15th. So the book comes out on July 16th, 2024, just in case someone's listening to this in the future.
We have the great privilege of advanced listening copies, so get a little confused, but perfect timing. You can go get his new book as soon as this podcast hits your ears.
Yes, I was a huge fan of Stephen's book that came out in 2020, The Only Good Indians. So when I saw this book coming out and it's called I Was a Teenage Slasher, I was very excited because I am a huge fan of slasher movies since I was a teenage.
This is one of those episodes where I do regret that it's not a video recording because Stephen is just so fun and wonderful to talk to. But also his office was one of the most incredible things we had ever seen. Would you like to describe it?
Sure. It was full to the brim with books and maybe movies of the horror genre. He was wearing a Stephen King ball cap, I believe, and had like a Scream ghost face mask on the back of his chair. And it was like a horror fan's dream office. In fact, I remember being like, oh my God, my gray walls in my office are so boring that I immediately painted my office, got a new bookshelf. I had office envy. So been trying to do little upgrades here and there.
All right. That's Stephen Graham Jones inspiring renovations.
Yes.
I love this.
He's also going on tour now for this book, starting tomorrow, July 16th, at the Strand in New York, being interviewed by Grady Hendrix. If you're a horror fan and in New York, also this episode's coming out after this, so hope you were there. We're not giving you the news. But yeah, I think he's going to Texas and Colorado and Seattle and LA, so he'll be all over hawking this new book. So
not Ypsilanti, Michigan isn't on the list.
I don't see it on the list. It's weird because it's usually a hotbed of entertainment.
Well, I'm going to spread the word, everybody. Spread the word. I'll travel to see Stephen Graham Jones.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I think we will roll a clip of the new book so that you can hear a little bit of that. And then, as always, if you'd like to stay after the interview, Craig and I will share a little bit more about what we've been reading and enjoying.
It was the best of times, high school, and it was the suckiest of times, high school. Would I trade it, though? If I could unkill 6 people, not make the whole town of Lamesa, Texas, gnash their teeth and tear their clothes and have to go to funeral after funeral that searing hot July? Okay, I may be exaggerating a bit about the clothes tearing, though I'm sure some grieving brother or friend or conscripted cousin split a seam of their borrowed sports jacket, heaving a coffin up into a hearse. And I bet a dentist or two paid their golf fees with money earned spackling the yellowy molars a whole town of restless sleepers had been grinding in their sleep, not sure if it was over, not sure if I was gone. And yeah, golf fees? I don't know. People who wear plaid pants and hit small balls aren't exactly the crowd I run with. The crowd I do run with are, well, we're the ones with black hearts and red hands, masks and machetes. And until I was 17, I never even knew about us. My name is Tolly Driver, which isn't just this grimy keyboard messing my typing up. Tolly isn't short for Tolliver, and Driver was just my dad's random last name, and probably his dad before him, and I don't know where it comes from, and even if I did, even if I had my whole family history back to some fancy mustached dude reining mules this way and that, it wouldn't change anything. In 1989, a thing happened in Lamesa, Texas. No, a thing happened to Lamesa, Texas. And to me. And to 6 people of the graduating class, some of whom I'd known since kindergarten. It also happened to my best friend Amber. She's why I'm writing this all down at last. I don't know where you are anymore, Ams. Maybe we weren't meant to ever see each other again after we were 17. In real life, I mean. Because I still see you every night.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Today, Craig and I have the honor to sit down with award-winning author Stephen Graham Jones. Welcome to the podcast, Stephen.
Man, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Craig and I are both big horror fans, as you may have gleaned from our conversation before we started recording. So you can also imagine we are huge fans of your work. So I'd love it if you could just take a moment to introduce yourself to our listeners and talk a little bit about what you're up to in the book world.
Sure. I am Stephen Graham Jones. I write horror novels. I write as many horror novels as I can. My most recent ones are Angel of Indian Lake. Before that, it was Babysitter Lives, maybe. Don't Fear the Reaper, My Heart is a Chainsaw, Only Good Indians, Map the Interior, Night of the Mannequins, Mongrels, and then probably about 20 more before that. I've been into horror for as long as I can remember. I do comic books as well. I live in Boulder, Colorado.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
That is actually a great transition. So in addition to being an author of many, many books, like you mentioned, you are also a professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder.
Mhm.
So I guess my first off, as a writer of so much and you're making so much content all the time, like how do you also find the time to be a professor?
Man, if I have any kind of secret, it's that I don't watch NBA basketball until the playoffs. That's my only time-saving secret. Which is to say, right now I'm watching a lot of playoffs, so I feel like I'm getting less work done. I feel guilty. When I'm not writing, I feel like I'm stealing air. Like other people should have this air I'm breathing if I'm not producing work. And I think that's probably why I do kick out so much stuff. It's that I don't know what else I'm good for other than putting words on a page, And if I'm not doing that, then why do I even bother to breathe?
Wow. Speaking of your students, do you feel that your conversations and lessons with students influences your work in any way as an author?
Yeah, it does. I hear myself. I'm with my students. I'm trying to like instill in them a sense of narrative ethics, I guess you could call it, and kind of like just I don't know, an ethical relationship to punctuation too, because so many people let that slide, and I don't think you can let stuff like that slide. I'm not saying I want to freeze it in place and lock it under glass and have it die. I want it to change and adapt to the world. But I hear myself telling my students to be good, basically. And then 2 or 3 hours later, I'm sitting at this keyboard and I'm kicking out some stories, some novels, and comic books or whatever. And I kind of hear myself saying to them, be good. And I realize I have to be good too. I can't just say it, I have to live it. And so teaching, I feel, keeps me honest.
Wow. Slightly silly follow-up question, but do your students
Mhm.
ever bring in books to be signed?
They do at the end of the semester. They usually say it for the end of the semester. And sometimes they dress it up like, my mom is your biggest fan in the world. Can you please sign this?
I love that. I would do the same thing. I'm too shy. I'm really interested into the path you've taken to get where you are today. In preparing for this, I learned for the first time that when you were growing up, you wanted to be a farmer, and that you were really interested in manual work. How did we end up with Stephen Graham Jones of today?
Oh, I know. It's such a wild ride, right? It's such an unlikely eventuality. Yeah. Well, where I grew up in West Texas in the Permian Basin, you had two life paths for guys, anyways, and that was you could be a farmer, you could go to the oil fields. And I saw a lot of people coming back from the oil fields missing fingers because chains yank your fingers off. And I kind of wanted to keep my fingers, and so I figured maybe I'd be a farmer. And I had people in my family who did both, of course, and also ranched as well. But I knew that ranching was on the way out unless you had like a lot of land, because you have to have a lot of land to make any money ranching. And I knew I wasn't going to have that. And for farming, you need to have land too. I knew I'd never have land to farm. However, with farming, you can be what's called a custom farmer, which is where you lease a tractor and you're just kind of half plow will or half tractor will plow. It's kind of like that, and you do plowing for other people. That's what my plan was. I just wanted to somehow get out of high school, lease a tractor, get a trailer out in the pasture, and drive a tractor for 10, 12 hours a day and have that be my life. But then when I was set to go off and do that, I finally got my diploma kind of around the side. I got kicked out of school, so I had to do it a different way. But my mom brought me out to eat, and she gave me two things. She gave me a suitcase because she said you got to get out of town. This town's gonna kill you. And she also said, "You've always been reading books. I think you need to be among people that read books." And she had saved up enough money for me to go to one semester of college, and at Texas Tech, which was 2 hours away. And I figured I can put off driving tractor for 4 months for a fall semester. And so I went up there and I sat in a classroom. And for the first time in my whole life, I never knew this was even a possibility. I was in a room with 17 other people who had read the assigned book, and we all talked about it like it mattered. Growing up, I was always the only one who read the stuff, and I mean, I love to talk about books, and I was always reading, but I was always like, getting kind of dragged across whatever social codes there are for being the nerd, you know.
Yeah.
But suddenly at college, it was like I found my people. It was wild. I didn't know there were my people in the first place.
Yeah.
So finding my people was amazing. And but then that little Cinderella story of 4 years finally went over, and I figured it's time to go drive tractor. And then my professors said, "Hey, you should go to grad school." And I kept saying, "Nah, nah." And finally I asked them, "What's grad school?" And they told me it's more school and harder school. And I was like, "I don't know about that." But they got on my case so much that solely to satisfy them, I put out two applications. I was a dual major, English and philosophy. I put out one application to philosophy school and one to English school to writing program. And the writing program got back first. And so I went to be a writer. And so I could just as easily have been a philosopher. It's totally arbitrary that I ended up writing.
Wow.
That's an incredible story. And,
Mhm.
the the
Mhm.
philosophy still shows up in your work that you do. So
Yeah.
it's a
Oh,
little bit
thank
of
you.
both.
Thank you.
Wow, that is amazing. Have you ever had a chance to sit down with your mother and discuss how that dinner you had completely changed the trajectory?
Yeah, I've told her, and it's kind of neat because I say she gave me two things. She actually she gave me a T-shirt also, which was like a painted skull with a cow skull that was all turquoised up, and it was a kind of cool shirt. And a couple of years ago, digging through some old boxes, I found that shirt, and my daughter wears it all the time now. She's what, 21, 20, she's 21 now, and it's so cool to see her wearing my shirt that I got when I was 17 when I graduated high school.
Wow,
Yep.
Uh,
that's amazing.
my son would wear it, but he's taller and bigger than me, so it wouldn't fit him.
That's funny. So although you primarily write novels and short stories under your own name, and alone, obviously, I saw that you collaborated with another author who I love, Paul Tremblay, for
Mhm,
a YA titled "Floating Boy and the Girl Who Couldn't Fly." And I
mhm.
had a couple of questions about that. Did you know Paul before this happened, or is this like some matchmaker in publishing world was like, "Hey, you two should meet"?
Yeah, no, it was Paul and I have known each other. What is this? Is 2024? We've known each other nearly 20 years, I guess.
Wow.
And he first got hold of me after my novel Demon Theory came out. We got to talking about that, and then I think I blurbed one of his early books. What was it? With the Harlequin and the Train? That's what it was. And we just became friends, and we've been really good friends ever since then. So when Paul kicked up this idea of a girl who could float, and he said, "Let's do a YA novel together," I figured of all the people in the world, he's the only person I could possibly write a novel with.
Mm.
And the reason, but I was still nervous about it because I've heard so many of these collaborations end up with the people no longer being friends. And so I was worried that we might be cashing in our friendship, like we might end up hating each other or something. But we didn't. We're still good friends, and it was a fun process, and I learned a lot too.
Speaking of the process, what is it like? Like, where you're just like throwing ideas back and forth via email, or like what did that actual like working process look like?
How it worked was Paul wrote chapter one and sent it to me, and I rewrote it and wrote chapter two and sent it to him. He rewrote my chapter, wrote chapter three, and we just went back and forth like that, like a
Oh, that's
volleyball
awesome.
getting batted back and forth. When we read each other's chapters, that let the voice kind of not be too jarringly different in the
Mm,
chapters.
that's really cool. Reminds me of that game you play like in the car when you're a kid, where you like say one sentence of a story and then the next person says the next
Yeah,
sentence, so on and so on.
yeah, yeah.
I was curious, why did you guys decide to use a pseudonym for the book versus having it just written by Paul Tremblay and Stephen Graham Jones?
I think later editions of that book have our actual names on it. But yeah, when we first were publishing it, Paul had Head Full of Ghosts about to come out, and we didn't want to like have too much of his name on the market, if that makes sense. That's
Yeah.
never that great. And so we told the publisher, hey, we're going to do a pseudonym. And immediately marketing, like in microseconds, it felt like, got back to us with a list of 40 names we could use. And those names we realized were all names that situated our book right by like Suzanne Collins' Hunger Games or, Stephanie Meyer's Twilight. They wanted us to have like shelf proximity to big hits so that we'd get snatched up. And we didn't feel like that was an honest move. So we just pushed our names together into PT Jones. Yeah.
Wow, that's so
Oh, that's
interesting.
fascinating.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah. I didn't know it till then. I didn't know it either.
I'll come clean while I was writing this question. I had like a follow up. I was gonna be like, where did you come up with the pseudonym? And as I was like saying it out loud to myself, I was like, wait, it's PT Jones. I was like, I'm so glad I didn't ask this question. But I did want to come clean about this ridiculous epiphany I had.
Yeah. Yeah.
My next question, you are not going to believe me, but this is true. On Tuesday of this week, I happened to finally pick up Eric LaRocca's book, Things Have Gotten Worse Since Last We Spoke. And I opened it on page 1. The first thing is a blurb from you. So
Yeah.
could not be more perfect timing.
Mhm.
And I wanted to read the blurb and ask you about it.
Mhm.
You wrote, some horror walks you down a dark corridor where there's whispers and laughter, sobs and screams. Other horror starts down at the end of that corridor where there's a door that opens onto you don't know what. Um, that stuck out at me as such an interesting way of thinking about the different approaches to horror. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, how you approach it and why this genre has become the place where you love to spend all your time.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, with horror, Stephen King used to get asked why horror a lot of the times, and he would always just say, some of us are wired that way. And that's basically my answer is I'm just wired for horror. I kind of cut my teeth on genre stuff and I just never really left. But what I particularly like about horror is that it can like provoke a visceral response from the reader that the reader is not necessarily willing to get, or like they don't sign a contract to be terrified in their bed with the lights on at 2:30 in the morning, And I love that horror can take it that one step further, that uncomfortable step further. It's
Yeah.
really cool. Like Psycho makes us afraid of showers. Like that's it. That's made up stories impacting the very real world, and I just love that horror is in that kind of dialogue with reality.
Oh, that's so cool. And yeah, and thinking about this, I think a lot about genre fiction. And I'm just curious, kind of what role you think horror as a whole plays in our society. I
Mhm.
think genre fiction gets not forgotten about necessarily, but just not considered in that way as
Yeah.
much. And
Yeah, I mean, and one you can look at it like Rod Serling, like the Twilight Zone. Like he was using the Twilight Zone, all those episodes to critique society, the society of his time, most definitely. And that's definitely one use of horror. Another use of horror is like a funhouse mirror to reflect back to us in distorted fashion our own anxieties and fears and issues and all that, of course. And horror, I think horror was the first genre of story ever told around the campfire. When the hunting party comes back after, 8 days gone from Three Valleys over, they in the shadows, they reenact killing this big bear or something and they do the sounds, and that's a horror story and the people are scared, they're listening to it. And so when we engage horror, I think we're engaging our most human center ourselves. It's a really honest genre to me. I'll never not be writing horror. I do science fiction, I do fantasy, but when I look at it, I'm like, oh, so this guy eats centaurs. That's kind of a horror premise.
um,
That's just where my impulses go.
yeah.
Definitely. Um, and speaking about your writing, you've acknowledged that you feel indebted to other Indigenous writers that came before you, such as Gerald
Mhm,
Visner.
mhm.
Writers who have influenced your work when you were getting started. And I'm curious, what writers or artists are inspiring and influencing your work now that you've progressed in your career?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Well, Louise Erdrich continues to. She
Mm,
is one of my heroes, my models. As for people on the contemporary scene, Paul is always somebody whose stuff I read very closely and
mm,
am both impressed by it and challenged by it. If that, And let me think. Gemma Files is pretty amazing. If y'all have read her novel Experimental Film, and she's got a lot of stories too. She's she really just has a good sense of how horror works, and it's good to read people who just have a really tight understanding of the mechanical aspects of horror and can do it in such a way that it doesn't feel mechanical, you know?
Well, Craig and I, and I'm sure all of our listeners who are fans of yours, appreciate how prolific you are. We're like, thank you. Please keep more books coming to us. Really excited to see that I Was a Teenage Slasher is going to be out this summer on July 16th, I believe.
Mhm.
So, what can you share about that to help folks know what to get excited about?
I Was a Teenage Slasher is set in 1989 in Lamesa, Texas, which is maybe 50 miles from where I grew up in Stanton, Texas. And it's a kid, Tully Driver, and his best friend Amber Big Plume Dennison. They get involved in a slasher, and this is a first person story. I see people calling it autobiography. I didn't think about it like that when I was writing it, but I guess that kind of fits. It's Tully Driver, the slasher, telling the story of why he did what he did, and he's
Mm,
telling it from a much later time. Um,
Awesome.
so yeah, it's hot. It's July in Texas. There's no rain. It's farming. There's a whole lot of me on the page, tell you the truth, because I was 17 in 1989, and I had really good friends. Like, what's that Stand By Me line? You never have friends like you did when you're 12 years old, you
mhm,
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the kind of friendship that I believe in anyways,
yeah,
and a lot of people die, not as many as Angel of Indian Lake, but this is a much smaller place too.
yeah.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait.
Mhm.
Speaking of slashers, like, were you doing any research for this by watching some of your old favorite slasher movies? Is there any influences that were kind of impacting you as you were writing?
You know, probably. I mean, I was really when I wrote I Was a Teenage Slasher, I was supposed to be writing The Angel of Indian Lake, and Jay Daniels, the only goggles she has are slasher goggles, and so to get myself in her frame of mind, I always am watching slashers when I'm gearing up to write a Jay Daniels book. And then instead of writing Angel of Indian Lake, I thought I'll just write another novel right quick. And so I had all that in my head for sure.
As one does, just writes a novel
Yeah,
right quick.
yeah, 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 yeah.
um,
um, Well, you probably figured we need to talk a little bit about the audiobook as well, since we are
Yeah.
an audiobook company. Craig and I saw that the new book this summer is narrated by Michael Crouch, and we've really enjoyed his
Mhm,
narration on other books
mhm.
as well. What is your experience like with the audiobook process and your involvement there?
It's been really I feel like I'm really fortunate. Michael Noble, the guy who directs all these audiobooks, he involves me at the very beginning. We pick the voice actors together. Dream like he'll ask, "Who's your dream cast? Who's the perfect person I can get?" But for Angel of Indian Lake, it was his idea to get Stephen King, and he made that work, which I don't know how in the world he pulled that off. But yeah, Michael Crouch for Teenage Slasher is perfect. His when Michael sent me his, I mean, when Michael Noble sent me his audition tape, um, it was like Tully was speaking into like from my machine, and it was just amazing. Evidently Crouch has some Texas in him, so it wasn't a reach for him. He's done having to put on an accent. And
Mm,
awesome.
and what's really nice too is that Michael as a director, he combs through the book so closely and sends me a list of words that can be pronounced two or three ways, and he has me record how they are in my diction anyways. And since this is like exactly where I grew up and when I grew up, we kind of let the way I would say the word be the guide instead of the right way to say the word, if that makes
mm,
Mm,
sense. And they're always calling me like very last minute too, because when you're doing the audio, I've found a lot of typos that have slipped through copyediting, proofreading, all that stuff. They surface. And Michael asked, "Did you really mean this?" And 99% of the time, I did not really mean that. And so we have to I tell Michael, yes, do it like the right way, and then we have to get hold of production with the physical book to fix it in that book as well, if there's still time, you know.
mm,
I never thought about that. That
yeah.
makes so much sense.
hmm hmm And there's also some song lyrics in I Was a Teenage Slasher, and I haven't heard it yet, but Michael and I agreed that if Crouch can kind of do those in the melody and which the song is, that might land them a little better, you know?
The pressure
Awesome.
is on.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. At the end of all of our interviews, we do a lightning round where we ask you some kind of quicker, sometimes sillier questions, so you don't need
Great,
to think about them too much.
great.
So I'll do the first one, and it is self-serving. As a horror fan, I want to know who your favorite slasher is and who your favorite final girl is.
Favorite slasher is Jason Voorhees, and favorite final girl, Nancy Thompson from Nightmare
Nice.
on Elm Street. Yeah.
What's your favorite breakfast food and why?
Favorite breakfast food? I just had it this morning. Soylent. I love vanilla Soylent. Do y'all know
Nice.
Soylent?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
um, so zombies, vampires, or werewolves, which would you least like to encounter in real life, and why?
Hmm. Probably a Probably a zombie, because zombies don't come single spy, they come in battalions, and, and they're gonna coat the world. There's a
Good
chance I can
answer.
put a vampire down or a werewolf down, but I kill one zombie, who cares? There's gonna be 6 million more, you know?
That's very logical. I like it.
So true. This is my most ridiculous one I've ever asked. What are you doing this weekend?
What am I doing this weekend? Hopefully just riding my mountain bike all over the place. That's what I'm doing this afternoon, and that when it's hot like it is, I just can't stay off the trails. That's all I do, you know?
Awesome.
So this month is a bad month for me to try to get riding done. I've got a lot of deadlines, but between watching the NBA playoffs and riding my bike all over the face of the earth, it's hard to steal away 2 or 3 hours.
If you could rewrite a classic horror story but with a modern twist, which one would you choose?
Oh, probably W.W. Jacobs and Monkey's Paw.
Mm.
Oh,
Mhm.
why do you pick that one? I'm so curious.
I think that story is maybe one of the one or two, maybe three most important horror stories of the 20th century, and it's like, to me, it's in the kernel of horror. And so
Mm.
to get to go into that kernel and maybe do it in a different way, a different and unexpected way, would just feel like touching the grail, you know?
Well, we'll look forward to it.
Yes.
Mhm.
Before we let you go, we would love to beg you for some book recommendations. Is there anything
Mhm.
you've been reading and enjoying recently that you would like to share?
You know, probably the scariest book I've read this year is Nick Roberts' Mean Spirited. That novel really made me be very judicious and strategic in the way I turn the lights off on the way to the bed at night, you know?
Well, if it could scare you, I mean,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wish I was a high threshold. I am easily scared. Like this morning, my wife, when like seven in the morning, she was walking out of the bedroom and the door was locked, and she turned back to me. She said, "You locked the bedroom door?" And I said, and she didn't even pause. She said, "You were scared, weren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I was scared." And the reason I was scared was last night I was watching basketball downstairs, and I muted it for a commercial or something, and I heard my wife sneeze, and so I texted "bless you" to her, and she never texted back. And I thought, oh no, that means that somebody's hiding in a closet and they sneezed, and so they're gonna come kill us in our sleep. And so I had to creep to my bed and lock the door.
oh my God.
I'm so glad it's not just me. Like, this is very comforting to hear, actually. That's how my mind
Oh,
works too.
oh my God. I'm going to sneak in one more recommendation
Yeah.
question that isn't in our script. Is we usually ask for book recommendations, but as
Mhm.
such a horror fan, I would be curious if you've seen any good horror movies recently,
Yeah.
that you could
You know,
recommend to us.
one that I would recommend, that I mean, there's been a lot of really good horror lately. Of
Mm.
course, like Infested, and what is that? Late Night with the Devil. There's been a lot of good
Oh,
stuff happening lately.
I thought that
I
was
know.
so good.
So did
Yeah.
I. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was real. I was really impressed. But one that may not be on people's radar is all the way back from 2004, which I just saw maybe 6 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago. Hellbent. It's a LA slasher. It's a slasher targeting the gay community, but it's not targeting these guys because they're gay. It's just targeting them because it's the reason slashers target people, because they're walking on two legs, you know. And I really appreciate that. And it's just a really tight, well done slasher, and it reminds us that a slasher can work if it doesn't have to have all these layers of referentiality and stuff on top of it, and it doesn't have to interrogate the genre. It can just do what Halloween did in 78, you know?
Mm. Oh, I'm so glad I asked now. I have something to watch tonight.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Well, that is it. That is all we had for you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you have lots of basketball and biking to do. So we appreciate you giving us a half an hour of your time today.
Man, it was great talking to you. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Well, thanks for listening to that episode, everyone. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And you should go pick up Stephen Graham Jones' new book.
Absolutely. Craig, is there anything else that you've been reading and enjoying lately that you'd like to share?
Yes. I picked up a book over the weekend in Rochester, New York at Book Eater, which if you're ever in Rochester, New York, go to this bookstore. It is a cafe bookstore in an old house, and I was smitten immediately and spent like 3 hours there. And of course, I had to buy some books. I bought a book based off its cover. Or rather, I picked it up based off its cover and then read the jacket, and I was like, "Yep, you're coming back to Boston with me."
I get it.
Yeah, the book is called "Please Stop Trying to Leave Me" by Alana Saab, and it is her debut novel. And I'm about halfway through right now, and am loving it. It's the story of this woman who keeps trying to leave her girlfriend, and this story is told through therapy sessions. So she gets a new therapist, and she's going back and forth with the therapist, and she says that she's in Oblivion. You'll learn more all about Oblivion when you pick this book up. It is so interesting, and it's unlike anything I've ever read. The closest thing I could relate it to is maybe Big Swiss, but it's even stranger.
How is that possible?
I know. It's so good. So go pick that book up, just like me.
Sold. I'm on it.
Oh, yeah. What are you reading right now?
Oh, I'd love to tell you. I thought you'd never ask. I just finished mere moments ago a great debut novel as well. It is called Ink, Blood, Sister Scribe by Emma Tersch. Transparently, I had to figure out how to say her last name because it's spelled Torzs, and there is an umlaut over the O. So hopefully I said it right.
I feel like you were just looking for an excuse to tell us that you knew the word umlaut.
I don't know how to pronounce them though, so this is not a net positive for me.
It's O on your word of the month calendar.
It starts with a U.
Can I edit that out? My guess is no.
Absolutely not. Let me tell you about this book. So it is a contemporary fantasy in which we've got a really interesting cast of characters, primarily two sisters who were raised by a family that practices magic. And in this world that we live in, magic exists only in the form of books. The spells are all in individual books. One book can contain one spell. And some of the spells are the big things you can think of. The reader of this will live forever. And some of them are small things, like the power will work for the next 60 days or until the spell is deactivated type of thing. Or
I think you need that one.
I kind of do. There are some other really like charming small ones where it's like the reader of the spell can see through the eyes of the nearest bird for the next hour. I loved it. It is very thrillery. There are all sorts of things going on with people trying to steal the books and trying to use them for nefarious reasons and battling for power. And so through the lens of these two sisters, we are just completely embroiled in the world of what's happening with magic and lots of interesting people that become part of it. I loved it. I loved it so much. I also must say, I bought the paper copy to read and then started doing my usual song and dance number where I was switching back between paper book and the audiobook. And I got to say, I ended up reading this 90% via audio. The narrator is absolutely incredible. Her name is Saskia Marleveld, and the audiobook is incredible. I can't recommend it enough.
So you hated this book, it sounds like. No, this
10
sounds amazing and
stars out of
sounds
10.
the most up my alley ever. It's been a
Yeah,
while since
yeah,
I've done a fantasy, so I think you've sold me.
Great. I hope you enjoy it. I'd love to discuss it with you once completed.
Sounds good. Maybe on the next episode.
Great.
All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed the interview and enjoyed our recommendations. Let us know. And if you are not a Libro member yet, you can use the code SWITCH and get 2 extra credits when signing up for a new membership.
I love that. And as always, thank you for listening.